Hey there, fellow commuters and go-getters, and welcome aboard the express train to success. Coming at you from the heart of hustle culture, I'm your conductor of candid conversations and snappy insights, Macy, and this is none other than the Office on Avenue M podcast.
The next stop is
Cracking Down on Performative Activism.
This episode was previously recorded. Facts and figures may have changed since the original recording of this episode.
My co-host today is someone near and dear to me, Mrs. Nichimyo Rich. She's been working with me for quite a long time. She's an incredible storyteller, creative, and PR girly who specializes in brand strategy and getting the job done and doing it well. She's been paving her own way for a minute, and she's also pursuing her master's right now. She's going to dive into this topic with me, so listen in to our conversation about impact and performative activism. That syncs the audio. Cute. Hi, Nichi.
Hi, how are you?
What up?
I'm good. What are you doing?
Okay, I have the day. Here to talk about performative activism.
Yes, let's do it.
I don't know when this episode's going to come out, but for those of you listening, we are in the height of a genocide. We are currently people of color.
Yes.
My whole life, actually.
Been there, done
Been
that.
there my whole life. And we are also in the media trenches. So we're seeing brands speak out on issues that they don't normally.
Yes.
Which could be a good and a bad thing. But today, particularly, we want to talk about performative activism, what that is, what it looks like, and how to not be that.
Yeah, let's do it.
First things first, I want you to tell me about Coca-Cola.
Oh, let's get into it. Yeah, so they're on the boycott list for supporting Israel. And they are, for two reasons. They have a factory in Israel, which is on Palestinian land. And then they also prohibited Palestine as part of their customizable bottle. So you couldn't design anything for Palestine on their own bottle.
Oh, so they were really saying this is for everybody but Palestinians.
Exactly.
Okay. And then in 2020, what was the tune that they were singing?
They were saying, "We stand together," and their website for specifically for Black Lives Matter is still up, and it says we have to work together. And I think their whole slogan is "We stand together."
So they're just selective in who they support, the groups that they support.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Very.
Okay, so when you say it's on Palestinian land, it's important that we make certain caveats. That means different things to different people. Technically, at the moment, it is the West Bank and Gaza, right?
Gaza, yes.
So the factory is where?
It is on Atura. I don't want to mispronounce it, but it's on Atura, and it's on an illegal Israeli settlement.
Okay, interesting. Mm-hmm. All right, so they're amplifying black voices in 2020 alongside many other brands. You guys were there January 2nd, 2020, when everyone and their mother had a black square on their Instagram. Pause. Making another correction. It was June 2nd, not January 2nd. We're talking about June 2nd, 2020. You remember those squares, right? Let's continue. Mm-hmm. And suddenly everyone said, we stand with Black lives. We're for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it was something we hadn't seen before, because I think previously those who were talking against social injustice and being vocal in that way when it came to race relations, it wasn't normally brands that would do that.
Right.
I myself even was like not expecting the brands that I support to be vocal in that way. But things have certainly changed.
Right.
I
think that it's in general, like since 2020, we've seen brands be more vocal, like you said, but there's also been a dip. So once that January 2nd blackout happened, there's nothing else. So for instance, Marc Jacobs, after I think they said something, we stand together around those lines, they haven't stood up for anything else. So there's they've been quiet.
Not me with a Marc Jacobs tote. But it's interesting because once the music stops and the hashtag is no longer trendy, they stop doing the dance. They stop doing the work. And then it becomes what we're categorizing as performative action. You're only making that stink and that noise when it's beneficial for your brand, it seems like, right?
Yes.
So before we go forward with this conversation, I think it's really important for us to create a definition, a framework for what performative activism is and what virtue signaling is, if we're going to be using these terms. So we're just going to go with generally the Google definition. There might be some nuances, but I'm going to read it to you Okay, so what is performative activism according to Google? Performative activism is done to increase one's social capital rather than because of one's devotion to a cause. Okay, so a huge distinction there is that it's not about the cause, it's about the bottom line, right? It's about looking good to your consumer in a moment because something is important to them in that moment and not necessarily part of the value system of your organization. And you can do that as a person and as a brand, right?
Yep.
And virtue signaling, you want to take that one, Nichi?
Yes. So, virtue signaling is the act of expressing a viewpoint with the intent of displaying and communicating good character. So, on the same note of releasing a blackout square, and makes the brand look good, versus going back to performative activism, actually caring and doing things that create community change for Black lives.
Yeah, putting in the work. That's often that's another theme that reminds me of one of the organizations that we've worked with. I'm not going to name them today. There was an issue where the people at the top did not look like the people at the bottom. So they were letting people in the door, but when it actually came to promoting people of color and women and other marginalized groups to the top of the top executive level, it just didn't happen. There was this invisible ceiling. That's one way that that organizations kind of don't execute or fulfill their, put their money where their mouth is when it comes to standing by those values. So that's one example. Let's talk a little bit more about what it looks like. So way back in 2018, I believe, my team and I, we all did a trends report. And one of those value systems that were really important for consumers to want to engage with a brand back at that time that we were foreseeing for the next 5 years, meaning now, was being rooted in realness, authenticity, and making sure that your values align with those of your consumers. I don't think this was as important even 10 years ago. Wow. But now there's a stark difference. We got some stats here from that same market trend report that says 63% of consumers prefer authentic brands and 65% won't buy from brands saying silent on issues. So if you think that you can just stand idly by while people are dying, there are genocides taking place, and social injustices in our world, I would rethink that. I would definitely reconsider. I think previously it just was this thought process of, let me stay neutral so I don't offend anyone, right? And I don't lose customers. But now your customers are actually looking and waiting to hear from you. Right?
Yeah. I think it's an expectation from consumers that, one, you have a point, you're actually doing work. And I think it also leads back to performative activism, especially now, like you said, like 5 years ago, just a square on Instagram would have worked. But I think now consumers are actually wanting to see that work, that community change.
Yeah, and community change, like I said, could come in the form of hiring, but it can come in more tangible ways that affect the community at large as well. Giving back to respective organizations, actually being a part of change conversations for, the consumer. So I have another question. I actually did a video on YouTube on this a few years ago. It was Pepsi related. I'm not sure if you remember that time. Kendall Jenner was in that Pepsi commercial. Yes. And she gave somebody, I forgot the details of it, but she gave somebody a can of Coke or Pepsi, whatever, in response to, what was it, the issue they were tackling? I think it was
still Black Lives Matter. I think so.
It was like police brutality or something, or unification. I don't know, but it was completely tone deaf.
It was.
So at that time when I made that video, which I think was, I want to say 2016 or 2017, the big question was like, should brands be speaking out? It was a question mark then. Now it's not a question. You should. But I think there is a question of when and which issues do you speak out on? Because we also, I personally am realizing that there's always going to be an issue. So if you speak out on one issue, the expectation is that you're going to have to speak out on the next issue and the next one. And it just never really ends. Right. And that could be exhausting. But I do think it's necessary. Is there a framework for like which issues you should tackle as an organization, do you think?
I think it should align with your own goals. I think like if your mission is like, and this is silly, but like putting smiles everywhere or something, like making everybody happy. If somehow the issue that is being brought up in society aligns with making sure people are happy, that will, whatever you do will not look like performative activism because it aligns exactly what the brand has been doing or supposedly been doing the whole time.
Right. Yeah. And then to take it a step further, I think it's also important to think about who your consumer is. So if that issue is important to a large base of your consumers, you should be one of the first ones to be vocal about it, not the last.
Right.
But at the same time, you said something about how if your whole thing is making people happy, should you not say anything? Is what I'm trying to unpack. Is like, what issues do you not say anything, or should you say something about everything? I think it's about the brand itself and what they stand for.
And what they stand for. Because I feel like even if they're not standing on a societal issue, they still have a mission, or they should have a mission that's broader than who they are. Yeah. So if they're like, if for a beauty brand, if it's to make everyone feel beautiful, maybe they're, if that's like going back to like making sure the societal issue aligns with that as well. Right. Yeah.
So I think what I'm hearing is that we have to really think about who our actual consumer is. And that goes back to really unpacking who your target market is. Because what's important to them should be important to you as an organization for this new age consumer. Okay, so Ben and Jerry's. We cannot talk about performative activism without mentioning Ben and Jerry's for the exact opposite reason of what performative action is. It's so interesting because while everybody was posting a black square and saying Black Lives Matter in 2020, Ben and Jerry's message was particularly loud. Yes. They said, and I quote, I might be paraphrasing, but they said, "We must dismantle white supremacy."
Yep, exactly.
That was such a bold statement at the time, and it inspired me to be to call a spade, because even though in my private conversations with people that I work with, I talk about these issues and I might say things like that, when it came to public statement, it was very clear to me that I would upset someone by calling out white supremacy as opposed to racism. But the reality is that racism is not possible without white supremacy. Exactly. And that is the root of racism. So they called a spade a spade. I actually sent the PR director of Ben & Jerry's a message to just say like, shout out to you. Fast forward to now, Ben & Jerry's is kind of getting some heat from some folks and not others. Nichi, can you just give us a little overview of what's going on there?
Right. So Ben & Jerry's is like actively talking about social activism, and actually, like when you said the white supremacy thing, they actually know what they're talking about. They did the research. They know what exactly is affecting the community that's being like affected right now or at the time. Fast forward, Ben & Jerry's didn't say anything about Palestine for a while. And I was actually doing a project for market research where we had to do social listening. And we went on all their socials. And the biggest thing people were saying was, why aren't you talking about Palestine? You talk about this. You're loud about this. They have posted about Palestine now. And I also know that Ben & Jerry's is owned by someone from Israel. So it's like it was conflicting for them. Yeah.
Hey, it's Macy in the future. A few clarifications, if I may. Ben & Jerry's was founded by Ben Cohen and Jerry Greenfield. Both are obviously Jewish, and they're from New York, not Israel. In July 2021, Cohen and Greenfield announced in their support for the company's decision to end sales of Ben & Jerry's and its products in the occupied Palestinian territories. In July 2021, Cohen and Greenfield also wrote an opinion piece in the New York Times. They wrote that it's possible to support Israel and oppose some of its policy, which is really what everybody is trying to say, but I digress. The opinion piece goes on to say that the company's stated decision to not fully align with its operations with its value is not a rejection of Israel, but a rejection of Israel's policy, which perpetuates an illegal occupation that is a barrier to peace and violates basic human rights of the Palestinian people who live under the occupation. Boop. And that's 2021. Now, the current CEO is someone called David Stevens, or Stever, who just took over in May 2023. Previously, he was a CMO for I think at least 15 years, and his stance on the conflict, his heritage, religious views, affiliations, all that is not public record, but he has been working with Ben & Jerry's for a long time, so we can make some assumptions. It's also worth noting that Ben & Jerry's was acquired by Unilever. I think we've gotten to this place where people are associating Palestinian liberation with being anti-Semitic, with being anti-Israeli, and that is not the case at all. And I think that made it difficult for them to say something, even though they previously have been so vocal. Why do you think that people are having such a hard time distinguishing the idea of supporting Palestinian lives and liberation and hating Jewish people? Why can't they separate those two ideologies?
Right. Honestly, I think since Israel is like there's a bigger support for Israel, especially in the United States. I think that also, and I think that understanding what's happening in Palestine takes research and takes a deeper dive. And I would say supporting Israel is like the more mainstream thing to do. And since Israel is associated with the Jewish religion, they're just tying themselves with that. But I feel like if you took the time to sit back and really understand what was happening, you would understand that it's not the same thing.
There are differences.
Yes.
There are definitely differences. And I think it seems like Ben & Jerry's as an organization has taken a stand, but have they actually taken a stand? What do you think of their move? Can you just kind of like recount what the move was?
Yes. So I actually want to not retract, but like update what I was saying about how someone from Israel descent. So what was the issue was that they also had a factory like Coca-Cola were on Israel land or Palestinian land, and they recently posted, Ben & Jerry's will end sales of our ice cream in the occupied Palestinian territory. So they are, like you said in the first part, some people don't believe it's their own territory, so they said that they're going to stop on Palestinian territory, and then they can't be inconsistent with their own values. They have a long partnership with the factory that they're stopping out, but they're going to create a new arrangement so that they're not being inconsistent with their own values. But I don't know how that will work.
So the thing is, it's like a statement without a statement. So yes. I don't know. This is for the first time a non-stand. Historically, let's talk about where they have been and how they have been vocal. I know we said we want to dismantle white supremacy. That was a big one. On their website, they call out a few causes that they care about. Some of them are racial injustice, fair trades, rights and dignity in refugees, democracy, campaign reform, LGBTQIA rights, our non-GMO standards, our climate impact.
They're the opposite of performative activism. Yeah, I feel.
I think so too.
Yeah,
because they actually are implementing changes. Mm-hmm. And the reality is, I think even most people who do support Palestinian liberation don't believe that the average Israeli civilian deserves to be shot dead. No one believes that, at least that I know in my circle. Yeah. I mean, I think the numbers with this, and I'm speaking now, we're in January, the numbers with this are pretty stark. You're talking about a little over 12,000 Israeli civilians being brutalized on October 7th versus now, I believe the number is, where are we in, 23,000 Palestinian civilians? Is it 23,000? Mm-hmm. It might be more.
It might be more. I heard a million. Okay, I don't want to say
it's not a million.
Okay.
Yeah, let's not get crazy. Hey, it's Macy again in the future, fact-checking as we're editing. As of March 5th, 2024, 30,035 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza and 70,000 have been wounded. This is what's being reported from the Associated Press on March 5th, 2024. It is likely that those numbers will increase by the time this episode airs. I also want to clarify that the amount of casualties that took place on October 7th in Israel was 1,200. That's 1,200. So for me, it's very difficult as a human that cares about other humans to say that this is a fair fight, especially when they don't have an army. Mm-hmm. Right. Especially when the primary victim are women and children who are civilians. But this episode is not entirely about Israel and Palestine. Mm-hmm. So let's pump our brakes right there and talk about how your brand can stand out in times of conflict and take stands on social issues and not be in the bucket of performative activists and keyboard warriors. Yeah, like tips on how to be a real bitch.
Period.
Right.
As a publicist and a brand strategist, how would you approach crafting a narrative in today's social political climate?
I think it's the same way you approach any other narrative. It has to be in line with the organization's values. And if you don't have value systems as an organization, I think it's something you need to definitely spend some time creating and cultivating if you want to really make an impact for today's consumer, because they're looking for that. The stats don't lie. I think it's 65% of consumers today are looking to spend with brands that have values that align with theirs versus not. So it's important for this to be a part of your marketing strategy, your communication strategy off rip. Because once you have that blueprint, it's hard to deviate from that because you already know who you are. So you have to know who you are. I think that's step one.
Ooh,
you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's good.
I did it?
You did it. You did that.
Okay.
And activism, how do you distinguish between authentic storytelling and just virtual signaling and brand communications?
I think this is an important question because it goes back to like June 2nd, BLM squares versus actually implementing strategies. Even though we have been somewhat critical of Ben & Jerry's in this conversation, I have a deep level of admiration for how they handle social issues. Right? So, and the reason for that is because not only are they being vocal and bold and standing on exactly what they're about, they're also one to implement change on a ground level. So that looks like being a part of their communities. Even with one of our clients, Exposure Labs, they did this groundbreaking film on a film series on tech bias, right? And we could have just released the film to like just Netflix or something and kept it pushing, but they wanted to take a step further and partner with actual organizers and activists that are putting in the work to actually make changes and strides to change the issues that they're tackling in the film. So really putting your campaign behind action is where you're really going to make a difference and set yourself apart from somebody who's just throwing up a square.
Ooh.
So
yes, I love that. Ooh.
What you think?
I agree. I think even as a consumer, we can see, like specifically for the film you were just speaking of, I think when people see it, they're going to see that there's someone that looks like them, someone that's actually doing the work and actually trying to create a equitable space in tech and fight algorithm bias. So when they see that, they can see that there's real community change happening.
Right. Okay. Exactly. I want to give some examples. We researched some examples of brands that are actually putting in the work behind the scenes. When the music stops, they're still about their business. It's still about their word. You pointed out Adobe.
Yes. So Adobe was one of the brands that released a square, but they also continue to celebrate and honor Black lives and the Black community. They also create spaces for other diverse folks. And so they're doing really good right now.
Yeah. So what's interesting about Adobe is, yes, when, June 2020 happened, it's the height of BLM, they were vocal, but not only that, they made that a part of the fabric of
their own brand,
of their organization. And I can't really speak to what was happening previously, but I know when we fact checked, when we cross-referenced where they are now, it aligned with what they were saying in 2020. So that's the biggest piece of it. Then we also mentioned Refinery 29. They actively celebrate and empower voices of color. And they've actually created an entire division dedicated to that. I think it has something to do with like bringing people of color into the workforce.
Yes.
And being part of those conversations. Yeah, bringing people into those organizations who don't necessarily look like the status quo and have different experiences is always going to set you up to be a more impactful organization. That's why we talk so much with Ada Developers Academy. When they're educating these big corporations on why they needed diversity, it actually impacts your bottom line because you have people who have diversity of thought, diversity of experiences creating your product and resonating with more people. So it's to your benefit every time.
And I also, to touch upon with virtue signaling, one way to not be doing that is actually have people in the room, because I think that's so cute. I think you talked about Kendall Jenner and the whole Pepsi thing. Wasn't there anyone in the room that said, no, that's crazy?
Yeah.
Like, don't do that.
It's an interesting story, and I think I mentioned this on another episode. I don't know if I told you this, Nichi, but one of my first PR big girl jobs, I was an account executive, and we were doing a beauty campaign for a skincare brand. And one of the lines for this campaign was, like, one of the slogans was, "Pale is the new black."
That's insane.
And I'm the youngest person in the room, the only Black person in the room. It's a small organization. And I didn't know at the time how to articulate, like, guys, this is not a good idea. I was like, I kind of said, like, oh, I don't know if that's, like I was timid in standing on how I felt about it.
Right.
And they moved forward with it. They didn't really want to take what I was saying into account. Fast forward, Nichi, you and I have been working for a long time. You know I will shut a client the fuck down. So
period.
Because I mean, it comes, it's a muscle you have to flex, but knowing your values is going to always be a guiding light on how your feet move. It's going to guide your footsteps. Oh. So knowing who you are as a personal brand and as a consumer brand is going to help every single time.
Yep.
So that's why you need to partner with a good strategist who can help you unveil who the fuck you are.
Period. You need Macy. No.
You need Nichi.
Oh,
all right, so let's talk about Google real quick.
Yeah, so in 2021, they wanted to build a better Bay, which is the Bay Area. So they invited local nonprofits to submit their own idea for positive social change. And 35 selected organizations will share a pool of $10 million in funding to receive support from Google. And why this works is because they are targeting the actual community, targeting the stakeholders in the community. So they spoke and created a space for nonprofits in the Bay Area. And it aligns with innovation, which is their whole thing. So it aligns with their goals, and they actually impacted the community they were talking about.
Right. Yeah. So it goes back to that illustration that we talked about before. It's so important to make sure that your words are aligned with action. They're backed up with action. That's the difference from being performative versus really authentic in your value system. And I think consumers can sense that, right? What about Groupon?
Ooh, okay, so Groupon is a cool one too. So Groupon is in response to coronavirus. I think this was a good one aligning with their own mission. So during COVID, we were all inside, and Groupon is essentially an activities thing where you go outside. So what they did is that they created this virtual volunteering, and they were able to use aerial images of the needs of the communities that needed most. So what they did was they aligned what they do, which is activities and going outside and creating community. They created this virtual volunteering that again, does this thing where it's not virtue signaling because they were able to align with what they are and impact the community they're speaking to.
Yeah, I mean, if you think back to what we did during COVID, well, we had a couple of skincare brands before Nichi and I started working together. And obviously that's beauty. They were luxury skincare at that, when people were out of work, not really thinking about beauty. So it was hard. What we did was we made sure that the labs that we were formulating these skincare products in were providing medical supplies to those impacted, those on the front line. And that was our way of tying, our value system to something tangible to our consumers, to showing that we care. Because we could have just said, "Hey, you get half off on this $200 serum during COVID because we care." But that says so much less than, "Hey, we're stopping the sales of this. We're not producing this product. We're producing hand sanitizer, and we're giving away our masks." I mean, it was overdone at a certain point, but I can say with great conviction we were one of the first beauty brands to tap into that. So let's go. Now, that brand aside, that's just one example of how I try to shape my career in general. I really try to align with brands that have shared values and care about the humans. Because at the end of the day, every company that we buy from is a composition of humans, whether it's a little bit of humans or lots of humans. There are humans on the other side of it. And showing that you are human is only going to make your consumer feel closer to you and more inclined to support you, whether financially or otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, as storytellers and storytelling to humans, like you said, if you are creating better experiences and better spaces for everyone, I think you look good to everyone. So, yeah.
Absolutely. If y'all want to keep in touch with Nichi, she is largely, what are they saying? She's chronically on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I am.
She's chronically on LinkedIn.
Yes.
She inspires me because I really need to be on LinkedIn, and she's probably so tired of hearing that because I've been telling Nichi I need to get on social media for like
You're killing it on TikTok.
Thank you.
You are. I watch.
But I just can't. It's hard for me. I like not being online. But it's important, right? is important.
You can make all the posts about your podcast.
Oh, that's what I'm gonna. That's why I'm doing the podcast.
So then you're done.
So I can put this shit in autopilot and be done.
Exactly.
That's
you're
the
done.
point.
Yeah, you're right.
Quite literally the point. To like kill two birds with one stone.
Yep.
All right. So how can people get in touch with you? LinkedIn primarily. Any other channels you want to shout out?
You can contact me on LinkedIn's the best. Nichimyo Rich. And you probably can't spell that. Spell that.
Okay, it's Nichimyo.
Rich. R-I-C-H. You got it.
Rich. Yeah,
yes.
The rich part.
Mm-hmm.
That's a cool last name.
Thank you.
That's it. I'm stopping it. Thanks for riding with us, passengers. If you found this episode entertaining, helpful, or just didn't hate it, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts so we can get those numbers up. It makes it all worth it. There's more where this came from, so you can find more episodes of The Office on Avenue M wherever you listen to podcasts. If you want to keep in touch with me, I'm at Meet Macy on Instagram. You can also reach me on my website via the contact form at www.macymedianyc.com. Don't ask me why I said www. I'm also on LinkedIn. You can find me there sometimes. This podcast was produced by the Macy Media team and others. I'm your host, Macy Harrell. This episode is sponsored by Macy Media, a media agency dedicated to amplifying meaningful stories to the right audiences. Macy Media specializes in public relations, creative direction, media training, brand development, partnerships, photo, and video production. Thanks for tuning in to The Office on Avenue M. And this is my stop.
Stand clear of the closed